Hey friends, today's $50 budget brew is going to have us draw our entire deck and immediately win the game just by casting our commander, Demonlord Belzenlok. So Demonlord Belzenlok is a mono-black 6-mana commander that essentially reads, when it enters the battlefield, you draw a non-land card and are dealt 1 damage. And if that non-land card is mana value 4 or greater, you get to repeat this process. So to draw our entire deck with this enter the battlefield trigger, all we have to do is make sure that every single non-land card in our deck has a mana value of 4 or greater. This is obviously a heavy restriction to build a deck, but the payoff is we draw our entire deck, so it's more than worth it. So winning with this budget brew is essentially a 2-step process. Step 1 is just ramping out and casting Demonlord Belzenlok to draw our entire deck, and step 2 is then winning the game with all the cards in our hand. So step 1 is ramping out Belzenlok. Not being able to play ramp spells that are below 4 mana value does make it a little bit tricky to ramp him out earlier. However, we do have some interesting options to help get him out 1 or 2 turns early. Lands that can produce more than 1 mana are going to be invaluable to get him out on turns 4 or 5. And we do have a few mana rocks that can ramp him out a turn or 2 earlier, such as Hedron Archive and Stonespeaker Crystal. The only other thing we have to worry about is the damage that we're going to be taking from Demonlord Belzenlok when we cast him and draw our deck. My list runs 72 lands, so that means Belzenlok is going to do at most 27 damage when it enters the battlefield. So as long as we're above 27 life when we cast Belzenlok, we're going to be a-okay to combo off and win. However, if we are stuck under 27 life, we can give Belzenlok lifelink to offset the damage he deals to us. Cards like Whip of Erebos, Homicidal Seclusion, and Deadly Wanderings can be cast before we cast our commander, and that's going to make sure we live through the enter the battlefield trigger. So once we're ready to cast Belzenlok, it's time to win the game. So step 1 is obviously casting our commander, Demonlord Belzenlok, putting all the non-land cards from our library into our hand and taking that much damage, a maximum of 27. Next, we're going to cast Unmask for 0 mana by exiling a non-combo card from our hand, and we're going to target ourselves with it to discard Phantasmagorian. When Phantasmagorian is in the graveyard, we can activate its ability, discarding Scourge Familiar, Dread Return, and a non-combo card to return it back to our hand. Next, we're going to flash back Dread Return, and in order to do so, we're going to need 3 creatures on the battlefield. Now, there's a couple ways we can do this for no mana. If we have an opponent who controls a forest or forest duel, we can cast Deepwood Legate for free. Or if we have 5 or more swamps on the battlefield, we can cast Dross Golem for free. Either way, that's going to be creature number 2, and creature number 3 is going to be Hollow One that we can now cast for free. Now that we have 3 creatures on the battlefield, we can flash back Dread Return, sacrificing Demonlord Belzenlok, Hollow One, and our 3rd creature to reanimate Scourge Familiar. Then we're going to use Scourge Familiar's ability to discard Skithiryx, the Blight Dragon, Cackling Imp, Grim Poppet, Cinder Haze Wretch, and Dread to float 5 black mana. And Dread is going to shuffle on top of our library. We're going to spend 4 of that black mana to cast Necrotic Ooze, which will have all activated abilities of creatures in our graveyard. We're going to spend that final black mana to give Necrotic Ooze haste from the Skithiryx, the Blight Dragon, in our graveyard. Then we're going to tap Necrotic Ooze to make an opponent lose 1 life from Cackling Imp in our graveyard, and then put a -1/-1 counter on Necrotic Ooze to untap it, thanks to Cinder Haze Wretch. And finally, we're going to use the ability from the Grim Poppet in our graveyard to target any other creature other than Necrotic Ooze, remove a -1/-1 counter from it, and put a -1/-1 counter on another target creature. But instead of letting that ability resolve, we're going to hold priority. With the -1/-1 counter on target creature ability on the stack, we're going to repeat the previous steps of tapping Necrotic Ooze to make somebody lose 1 life, untapping it by putting a -1/-1 counter on it, removing the -1/-1 counter on it by putting it on another creature, and doing this over and over to make our opponents lose infinite life and win the game. So that's the deck. We cast our commander, we draw all the non-land cards in our deck, and then we finish things off with a Necrotic Ooze combo. It's very silly, it's very linear, but it can win surprisingly easy, and for just $50, it's actually quite decent. The idea for this deck was based on a primer that I found on Tapped Out by username Basil. So if you're interested in a non-budget version of this deck, I highly recommend checking out the original primer, which will be linked in the video description below. And that wraps up this budget commander, so until next time, friends, see ya!